Hello, everyone. My name is Henrik Holt. I work as an account executive here at Ardoq. And today I'm sitting down with our VP of Customer Success, Ian Stendera, to talk a little bit about the experience that we have built up over the last couple of years. And for the first LinkedIn Live video today, we're going to talk about engagement. And why are we going to talk about engagement? I will tell you this now. So over the last couple of years, we've been working with over hundreds of different enterprise architects and EA teams and IT leaders. And what we have found out and realized is that having engagement and creating engagement in the wider organization has been a big challenge for a lot of the EA teams that we've been working with. So today, I'm sitting down with the master himself, Ian Stendera, to learn more about his experience because he's been here since the start as well. Ian, how's it going?
It's going good, man. I'm not gonna lie, it's weird to be on live streaming, but yeah, It's good. I mean, one thing that I want to say, it's not just the challenge, but it's also like the key success criteria, right? Like we see that those who break the code on engagement, those are the EA teams that make the biggest impact and really drive change.
Yep. So today as well, we're going to break up the presentation a little bit. So we're going to start to talk a little bit about, what's the history of EA and what's the history of how enterprise architecture has been worked with in regards to challenges of engagement as well. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about our experience over the last years, what we see that is going to be success criteria for succeeding with engagement in the business, and also some case studies that we have worked with in some companies to really demonstrate how this has been worked in kind of practical terms as well. So just to begin with, Ian, before we jump into this, so you have been here at Ardoq since the start.
Yeah.
So how have you seen that this have changed, like the concept of enterprise architecture as well?
I mean, the concept of EA, or what is in the scope of EA, I guess it's kind of been the same, but how it's done has definitely changed a lot in the last 7 years. When we first started, we were working a lot more closely with like project managers and solution architects and things like that. But once we started getting into the EA teams and the EA realm, we started to see that there was a very clear shift. I mean, enterprise architects in general seem to be acknowledging that they need to change the way they work. And that shift has been going on probably for the last 10 years, but it's really come to light in the last 5. And that could be seen, whether you're on stage at Gartner listening to them talk about some new buzzword, or if you're actually seeing how teams are getting redesigned and reintegrated to be more agile and just actually integrated into the organization. So it's been a shift. You see that it's the challenging thing, right? So we've seen that architects are, kind of debating with themselves about how do they fit in this new world. They obviously are a very valuable aspect in driving change and keeping the business competitive and agile, but they need to find their place. And that, can be played out on LinkedIn and forums to see that argument happening every day. But it's a good change. I think it's something that's kind of making us reflect on ourselves and how we work, challenging the status quo. But moving forward without forgetting about the good stuff in the past. There's a lot of good things that we can carry over from what we've learned in the last 20, 30 years in EA. So it's definitely changed a lot since we started 7 years ago.
Yeah. So I also think that in the presentation today, what we heavily focus on here at Ardoq as well is that we want the enterprise architecture or the functions to really support the business objectives and like the key business challenges that organizations are facing. So some of the concepts of us doing this now with LinkedIn Live videos as well is, first of all, to show that, who are the people that works at Ardoq, but also to share our experience. And engagement is, of course, a key element of really succeeding with enterprise architecture or change projects in general. So hopefully we will do a lot more concepts going forward. But we think that a key starting point should definitely be, why do we need to change the way we work in, and why do we need to change?
Yeah. So just to be clear as well, like we do have some slides here, but this is just pulled out of actually some webinars we posted over the last few weeks. Engagement is just a repetitive topic that keeps coming up, whether that's in technical implementation or in actual best practices and people. Engagement seems to be a topic everybody's really curious about, and the reason why we keep repeating it in these webinars. And it's not just us as well, it's the clients we're bringing to these events as well. So these are some slides. So for those of you that have seen those webinars, you might have seen them before. Excuse that, but also if you haven't, there are a couple of really good webinars now on the website where you can check out and hear from other enterprise architects like Condé Nast, as well as Debashis from NBC, and what they think about managing change in the modern world. So some key reasons why this is obviously a hot topic today. We all know that speed is happening all around us in the way we change. So you see that the rate of change is increasing, and that is both on the technical side especially, but also even on the business side. Having new disruptions in our business models mean that we need to come to market with new services and new products quickly. And of course, technology. I mean, you as a salesperson now can just go buy a new specialist app, plug it into our CRM system, and not even necessarily flag that to the internal IT or operations, right? And that might not even cost you anything. It might be free for you. But, this could be a challenge for an organization that starts accumulating some technical debt, as well as compliance issues, right? And this kind of change we see everywhere, whether that's moving to the cloud or adoption of new technology. So speed is a big factor. Complexity. So with speed and change comes complexity, right? We're much better at adding than we are at subtracting. If you look at any bank, any international bank at least, it's like looking at a library of technology over the last 50 years. They have some of the most modern, innovative solutions, but also some of the most tried and trusted, stable legacy solutions. And there's a reason for that, but that complexity adds to the requirements of EAs to be able to manage that at scale. Expectations are also rising, right? So, we saw just last year the report for 2019 in the UK, the top job was enterprise architect. I've never seen that in 7 years. I think there's a reason for that, given all the change, but that's coming with a lot of expectations as well from management, right? So they know that they need to drive change in order to maintain competitiveness, handle, cost scenarios and pandemics that are impacting their business. And architects really are a key change maker in that process. So that's why they're sought after. That's why they're well paid. And now as well, why they're having such good job satisfaction is because they're actually being utilized. So the expectations are increasing with all this. Unfortunately, we haven't seen that real impactful change happening on the engagement side. I mean, at least when we come into organizations, when they end up reaching out to Ardoq, usually they're at a point of reflection saying, look, we need to change the way our EA function integrates. We need to think about how we can scale this out without just adding more heads. And most people acknowledge that engagement is kind of that key factor. And they acknowledge as well that they're not necessarily designed for that. So no tool is going to fix this, obviously. This is a people problem as well as anything. But unfortunately, enterprise architects are often found isolated in the organization, seen as this ivory tower sometimes, seen as just the no guys or compliance and governance guys. Depending on the culture of the company, they might be utilized in one specific way, which really doesn't show the full potential of what EAs could do, right? So engagement is a key factor to that. So there's a couple of things that we think people can think about when they think about scalability in their practice. The one we're going to talk about today, obviously, is driving engagement. Automation, though, is another thing people should really consider. And like you said earlier, making sure what we do actually delivers real, measurable business value. That's a key factor. We're not going to dive into that. There's other talks out there for that, but let's dive into engagement. So let me ask you, I mean, you're basically our first person people talk to, right? When they are interested in change. What is the situation when you talk to a client? Do they typically have EA solutions or good best practices already up and running? Are they relatively immature in that sense and they're looking for a lot of guidance? Like, what is the typical interaction you have with clients?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that it's a couple of different sides to this topic as well. I think maybe the first one that is very, very common and the most frequent ones are usually they're using a lot of office tools, Excel, PowerPoint, Visio, and so on, which I think is where actually most companies are at today. But we also see companies that has been using, traditional EA tools and been using that for many years. But I would say like maybe the key challenge is like their current situation is, first of all, like the enterprise architecture function has been struggling, or the IT organization have been struggling communicating to the business side, because usually, as many years before as well, IT was kind of a support function, but now it's navigating more towards kind of a partner strategic function with business. So this is also something that management see. Also, we have seen that a lot of managements actually they haven't heard about enterprise architecture as in the name of enterprise architecture,
Mm.
but they're working with it.
Right.
So that's another thing, and I think they.
You come across a lot of companies that have like non-titled EAs.
Yes, that's because you have, let's say one of our customers as well. So with Malmö municipality,
Yeah.
so they didn't call it enterprise architecture, but they were project leaders. They were also IT analysts, and that's how they have been working with the architecture,
right,
as we call enterprise architecture.
Right.
But then I think one of the key challenges that they have realized is that business and IT are speaking two different languages.
Yeah.
So they want to make it easier for themselves to keep, the data and information up to date, but also distribute that information to get more insights from the business side, but also deliver better outputs to the business side. So having traditional tools such as Excel, PowerPoint, of course it does the job, but in regards to the speed and complexity, my experience at least is that you need something that can do the job for you, so you can spend more time on doing analysis, actually communicating with value-added stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Gartner did this research about 2 years ago, I guess it was now, where they try to see, do people really feel like they're getting business value out of their EA tool? And to be clear, the tool, again, it's just a tool, right? You can't take it too far. But the fact is, I think that reflects a lot on the EA practice itself as well. If you're not able to get value out of your professional tooling, you're probably hindered in the value you can deliver out of your EA practice. And I think as well, we should maybe get away from EA, but just general change management, right? Digital transformation. Like, you don't necessarily need to be an EA to be a real contributor to change, but you need to have that same kind of outlook and overview. And if you don't have the professional tooling in place to do that, then you're hindered, no matter how skillful you are, obviously. And I think, looking back at engagement, we see this as probably one of the highest contributing factors to why value is limited. This is some research that our product strategist, Edward, had done in the last 20 years, I think, working in the insurance and finance industries as an enterprise architect. And basically what he did is he continuously interviewed and tried to map out the level of engagement across the organization around the EA practice. And of course, around tooling. So what you see here is you have basically the gray on top is kind of the overwhelming business organization. The blue is the IT organization. And then the orange is level of penetration and engagement. And it's really small. It's really hard to see for those on a small screen. It's because it's been really poor engagement. But what is clear here is there's a typical trend of a wave, right? You get a wave of engagement, and that usually is accompanied by either a restart of the EA function, an implementation of a new tool. And basically what that does is that drives a level of engagement in mapping and understanding of the architecture. And that dies off, unfortunately. And the reason for that dying off can be a lot of things. People change jobs, but also it's just basically the way we see it is that the EA practice and their processes and their methods are not integrating well into the greater organization. So instead of building on organic growth, they're just forcefully driving engagement with hard manual labor, and then it dies out. And this has been our motivation as well when we started Ardoq. The two founders had worked with EA tools. They both ended up, kind of reverting back to Excel because they just couldn't get the engagement and the speed they needed. But all that ended up doing is making a few people the bottlenecks to change projects. And so this has been one of our founding blocks to building Ardoq has been, how can we drive engagement outside? How can we democratize enterprise architecture, really? And that's been since day one. And that's why we're a SaaS tool. That's why we've looked at UX since day one. That's why we continue to invest in product design and UX instead of consulting, because we want to make sure that the product drives engagement itself, not become a barrier. The other research that he did was looking at just engagement within the EA function in their own tooling. And this is where it's really sad. So you go out, you buy a professional tool that's supposed to help deliver real business value and drive meaningful change, but you're having utilization of 15%. That's not really anything, right? You're not hitting critical mass by any means. That means people are not making decisions based on the effort and are obviously not motivated to even improve their repository if they don't trust anybody else is using it. Where they did use it though, and this is kind of the frequent thing, is in the IT landscape. And that's common. And I think that also is kind of why EA has been boxed into this IT world, right? Because if you're only getting over the technology aspect of things, the business is just going to put you in a box.
Yep.
That doesn't really build that bridge you need
No.
to really be that strategic partner, right? We see EAs as becoming more of like a strategic management consultant. But if you're put in an IT box with only IT control, you're not really going to do that, right?
But also, like, I think that's, you mentioned this at one time, which I think is really good way of looking at it. I think that organizations are very good at adding new systems.
Yeah.
But the challenge is removing like the old ones.
Yeah.
And of course, these numbers, they also speak really well for that, because it's, you know, changes are happening all the time, and then engagement suddenly becomes really much more important, just within IT as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, unfortunately, we see that just even driving engagement between the architects and, you know, the application owners or the DevOps guys, that's a hurdle in itself, right? And this is the same team, right?
Yeah.
At least traditionally. So looking at fixing that is key. This is a slide I actually stole from the Condé Nast presentation we had with their chief architect, and he had some key takeaways. But notice that, you know, one of them there is communication, the last point. And that's something I think we should talk about, we should acknowledge, right? Like, to fix engagement, it's not a tool. It's, you know, a tool can be a tool in the process, but it's not going to be the magic button to fix engagement. Both Debashish and this webinar with Condé Nast, both webinars were very clear that the soft skills of the EA should be the investment point. You should really be investing in how you build that collaboration across teams from a people perspective. I mean, I've heard you guys say it a couple times. You feel like you're training sometimes your champions how to sell.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, but it is true, because it's you know, about communicating the value of what we're actually trying to do, and
what they're actually trying to do.
What they're actually trying to do, like to, you know, again, solving those business questions and business challenges. And we also say this, we're very honest. Like when we first sit down with companies as well, both smaller and larger companies in every type of verticals, we're quite honest with them. We say up front that, you know, it doesn't matter how good the tool are if you don't have the soft skills in place. So, and of course, maybe that's a little bit different approach compared to how it's typically been, since we work with sales and project management. But I think it's much better to be honest and say that, you know, it doesn't matter how good tools you have.
It's doomed to fail.
Yeah, it's doomed to fail if you don't have that, you know, that groundwork from the start.
Right.
Which is the soft skills and how people communicate and work together.
I mean, do you feel that people have a hard time formulating the value of EA?
Yeah, maybe the value of EA, but then when we take it up a notch and we start to talk about, okay, not necessarily EA, because EA is kind of the tool to solve the challenges that we have and you know, take the company forward, whatever the key challenges is. If it's, you know, rationalizing our applications, cut costs, merger acquisitions, you know, strengthen our business capabilities, ensuring that we are, like, all the projects that we're setting in motion are actually attached to some of the capabilities, or improving our business KPIs. But I would say, you know, instead of talking about EA, we usually focus on, okay, if we break it down to day-to-day for the enterprise architects as well, like, what is your day-to-day consisting of, and how do you see that work contributing to the business going forward? And then we start to take it up a notch and we say, okay, so these are the business objectives. How can I communicate better with business, or with my CIO, or with my application owners or project owners, to really ensure that we're much more streamlined? But of course, it is challenging, but we also know that expectation management of what you're trying to do in the beginning is really important, but also making sure that you always have the business objectives in mind, always. Yeah.
I mean, one thing I've been also thinking about when I did onboarding, so now moving, the company's growing, right? We're now 70 some odd people. I'm not doing so much onboarding these days.
Yep.
But doing onboarding, there was a real clear section where we really focused on who do you need to engage with, and what are they interested in? Like, what's the value that they're looking for? Because it's really easy to identify, like, I need to get this data from him and that data from her and all this stuff. I need them to contribute to my EA repository, right? But there's no motivation for them to do that. If you have a really strong, like, policy or culture for just doing what the boss says, and the boss says, look, you're working with this, then it works, of course. But most organizations don't have that. And many organizations actually frown upon that. They want people to have some sort of, you know, autonomy.
Yep.
So what we often did in the onboarding was say, okay, let's look at, of course you need 5 different teams to contribute to your EA repository. That's great. But let's look at the top 3 or top 2 and figure out what are their strategic objectives, right? They might not be the same as yours. Ideally, they should at the end go to the same company objectives, but probably not parallel right now. And the other thing is like, what can you give them? So a big communication thing that we were teaching our architects to think about was really think about that selfish value that person they want to collaborate with has and what you can give them back. Because without that, you're having a hard time just recruiting people to give you time.
Yeah.
Nobody has an extra time in the company, right?
Nope.
I don't know how many of your colleagues you think just sit around and wait for you to ask them.
Yeah, I think that's pretty rare that you came across that.
Yeah.
So
very rare.
Yeah.
So on the soft skill side, I mean, building the communication skill set is a huge part of, obviously you need to learn how to speak to people in their language and their thing, but also acknowledging that selfish intent really helps build that communication and collaboration channels to be able to give and receive.
Yeah.
First step to engagement, absolutely. Yeah. So that's the people side of things. Let's think about the communication aspect when it comes to actually dealing with the EA assets, models, viewpoints, whatever you want to call it. The output. Personalization, I think, is absolutely critical. And I think this is where tooling and frameworks and methodologies have really let us down in the past, was that the academics of it limited the consumption of it, right? Like you need good structure, you need good models to do proper analysis.
Yep.
I won't argue that at all. There's a lot of value in following a good framework, especially if that framework fits your organization, right? But what I've seen has been the biggest challenge is communicating that to the next person, whether that's a business stakeholder or even an IT stakeholder. You might have to train them in the framework before you can even communicate. And we all know it's hard enough to build collaboration to begin with. Throwing up another barrier is not really helping yourself out at all. So something that we really focus on at Ardoq, and really something I think, even if you're not using a specialist tool, something you should really think about as an enterprise architect is to stop bringing your view to the others, but instead bring it to them in their perspective, where perspective is key. That might mean that you have to get away from terminology, lose the religion, lose the dogma. But in order to communicate, you should really do that. Yeah. And the reason why professional tooling can help you with that is because that's really a challenging thing to do at scale, right? That's why people have one large diagram they just walk around and explain to everybody with. Yeah. They become a bottleneck, the diagram's out of date, and they can't keep it up the detail level they need. And that is essentially because they lack the ability to really personalize the communication to that person, to that stakeholder.
And I also think that maybe here is also where you have like the importance of also setting up integrations with other tools that you're already using.
Absolutely.
If it is Confluence or Jira or cooperative tools that are already being in place as well.
Right. So if you get to the point where you can communicate to a new team in their language, right? So if you're speaking to an application owner, don't tell them about all the other things that don't matter to them. Tell them very specifically what their application or system or however they relate to it is connected to the critical things of change, right? But how do you distribute that? That's the next step, right? Getting the language down right first is the first step, but then how you distribute it is next. And again, this is where tooling can really help that engagement, but looking for how you can integrate to meet them where they work in order to, once you get that data in, to turn that knowledge back out to the organization. Yeah. And PMO tools have been a great thing, like Jira, or even like ticketing systems like ServiceNow or whatever. But also just the huge amount of specialist tools that are out there, right? So we see people really integrating Ardoq with everything from monitoring solutions to continuous deployment pipelines to their AWS instances, to their CMDBs, of course. Where we see the future of this happening is more on the communication side, which is Slack, even just automated their emails. So being able to notify somebody who is really either responsible or interested in a part of the architecture, whether that's a product or a service or something, notifying them of potential change.
Like a subscription.
Subscribing to what you care about. That could become in an email or Slack. And if you really think about the potential when you start thinking that way, these legacy tools or these non-professional tools like, you know, a suite of manual labor, Office, Microsoft Office, or whatever, just doesn't really empower you to do those kind of opportunities. And that's where people need to really think about the future when they're trying to future-proof their EA teams.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. The other thing with, you know, this again, this is stolen from another demonstration, another conversation, but each of these characteristics, these roles, typically have a different view on the architecture, and they have different levels of information they can give you. But once you collect all that and connect it and enrich it, distributing it back out becomes that next phase, which is what we talked about. One thing we really think is critical is acknowledging that and meeting those people where they work in a language they understand and really understanding their requirements, and that's key. This is something the CTO just showed a couple of external people, which I thought was really funny. It's a bit, you know, classic.
It's nice.
Perspective matters.
Yeah.
Right. So think about, I mean, from a data perspective, right? Noise might not tell a story to one person, but might tell a huge story to another person. So like an architect looking at just a mess of integrations that have they're not following any good principles or any good design, that looks like risk or cost or whatever. But then showing that same picture to a business owner, they just see a knot in the world. They don't really know what matters. And this is great, right? Like giving a baby a toy. You think it's beautiful, but the baby just sees a bunch of thumbs.
Yeah, I almost said something different, but I won't go there. But I you know, it is. I think this is so great way of looking at it as well, because just imagine that you're going to communicate to executive management or the CIO, whatever it is. And instead of giving them access to the tool where they will get completely lost, even if it is Ardoq, let's be honest, we can rather, you know, present something in a form of dashboards where it's more like kind of a.
I mean, what do they consume today?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
They don't rock up into your desk and look at your architecture model and be like, oh yeah. Look at that technology component. It's going out of service.
I like it.
I like
that reference. Right. It's a nice reference. Yeah.
I'm glad it's going the right direction.
Yeah.
No, they don't care.
No.
They care about the results. They care about the risks, the costs. Essentially, at the end of the day, if you get high enough, basically all they care about is metrics. Yeah. Unfortunately, that's not true. That's exaggerating. But their best way of communicating and consuming your story will be probably starting with metrics. Yeah. Real impact. And that's again why you have to pick tools that are open and you know, can integrate and can actually take that EA data and convert it into something like Power BI where they're already working. Being able to take, you know, like a CIO or a risk officer or anybody on those lines and bring in that enterprise architecture perspective into their dashboards. I mean, that's powerful. That builds you in as a strategic partner. That makes your data valuable just because it's actually being used. And what we see is that correlation between when people start saying that their data is used and reused for other purposes, they're much more willing to engage and to collaborate, right? I don't know if it's public shame. You know, if you know that everybody's looking at your work, then all of a sudden you're going to do your work. Yep. I don't know if it's just validation that it was job well done and time well spent, but there's some human aspect there that when we see that we can clearly communicate to users that other people depend on their data, the quality of data rises, and engagement drives up. So there's something going on there.
And we usually also talk about like how can we make the let's say the working with your architecture and your landscape, how can we make that much more proactive than reactive as well? So instead of, you know, focusing on short time fires, extinguishing short time fires and day-to-day tasks, or goal and mission as well, just from the let's say the architect side, is actually to bring them up to the management and actually deliver more value, and then become more of a partner, more strategic, because I think that's also something which is maybe something of the most fun of the job as well.
Absolutely.
To really contribute to where the business is going forward, and, you know, key elements of that as well.
I can guarantee you the majority of architects would prefer not maintaining models.
Yes.
That's the majority of the time spent.
Yeah.
I think they'd like to be working on more interesting tasks, like truly impacting the strategy.
Yeah.
Engagement. So there's a couple things I think we kind of skimmed over, but I want to like reiterate. I mean, if you're going to set up or reevaluate your EA function, and you had one KPI, I would highly recommend that you look at how you can measure engagement as your KPI of success. The fallout of there is going to be a lot of things, but data quality is going to be one. The lack or the level of detail that you're going to get into your architecture is another. The other thing is that more and more organizations are enabling front-end, or frontline workers to make pretty impactful decisions, whether that's a team running a sprint and an agile team, whether that's a well-integrated architecture team that's on cross-functional teams building new products or services, even on the business side and development of new products and testing and going to market with new innovative ideas. More autonomy means more decisions in the front line. And if engagement's your metric, then you're going to see that those decisions are going to start being made with the EA principles in mind, which means hopefully better governance, better control, lower risk, those nice benefits, right? Yeah. So if I was to say like what the leading indicator is for a successful EA team, I would say engagement is really high up on that list. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how much of your meta model is fulfilled. It doesn't matter necessarily how much you trust all the data in that meta model. If it's not being consumed or reused or repurposed or driving decisions, it's not delivering value. And at the end of the day, that's really all that matters, right? We're here as architects to enable better decisions, not to deliver a drawing or a viewpoint or a repository of data just to cover documentation requirements, right? And I think that engagement factor really is critical to that.
Yeah.
So yeah, your data quality, you got better decisions being made. You also have the reduced labor on the EA team or the architecture team in any function, whether it's a solution architect or a data architect or whatever. With more collaboration, you can actually democratize that maintenance across the bigger surface. Of course, automation can really benefit of that, and that's a whole other talk. But on the things that have to be manually done, if you can distribute that workload, then you're golden. Yeah. You're going to have a lot more time to work on the value-adding tasks, mitigate those risks, and design better futures. So those things I think are critical to keep in mind as we're designing or redesigning our EA functions, and as we think about modernizing and keeping pace.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Great.
What do we got here?
Yeah,
some highlights, right? So, if again meeting them where they work is critical.
Yeah.
You mentioned integrating in tools that they're using. That's a great point. We really got to look at how you can do that. I mean, this is both Ardoq today, but also Ardoq roadmap. This is what we're talking about as being one of our critical success criteria as well.
Yeah.
Meeting them in a language they understand, and the UX they expect.
Yeah.
Right.
Simplify complexity.
Absolutely. That is our job often, right? As architects, is to simplify complexity and to really communicate the nuances in that complexity. Don't ask without giving. It's like, it's what your mom would tell you back in the day, and it still goes to business as well. It's sometimes hard for us to reflect on, especially in really well-established functions or really well-established teams. Like usually they're in a process where, they do quarterly outreach, or they send out surveys or Excel sheets, and it just becomes like routine. Like every quarter I'm going to send this out, and then I'm going to hound people for another quarter and to get it all fulfilled. And then we punch in all the data and clean it up, and then we're at it again. It just becomes a cycle. Kind of reflecting back on why are we doing this and what can we do to make this more like continuous. I think giving is a key factor there.
But also that's like, don't ask without giving, of course, but also asking why. Like
yourself.
For yourself, why are you doing this? Like, how is this actually contributing to, first of all, your job, succeeding in your job, in the individualistic term, but also for the business.
Right.
Like, is the things that I'm doing now, is that efficient enough if I'm actually realizing the business objectives? And of course, it takes more than just one individual. But when you start to think like that, I think we can become much more, ownership, as you have written down.
Absolutely. The why can bring a lot of aspects to this. So, when we have this survey function in Ardoq, right? So you can mass produce surveys and reach out to the wider organization to get data. It's a really flexible solution. So that means you can design that as you see fit, kind of. And what we saw is there's a very different level of engagement based on what they ask, right? So when we were doing the GDPR sprint, we had a couple of clients that, the full GDPR questionnaire, like 50 questions. The return rate was
0.
Horrid. Yeah, absolutely horrid. But to break that up and ask yourself why, and then kind of do that risk analysis even on the survey and say, okay, I know I should have these answers, these 50 answers. The deadline's coming up. We need them all. But really, what are going to highlight the areas of risk that I need to know about to get work going, to start mitigating the compliance issues. That turned that list down to like 6 questions, right? But then they could even break up those 6 questions into 3 different surveys for 3 different stakeholders of 2 questions. All of a sudden, the response rate went through the roof. the data quality went up, and then they were able to come back later on with those follow-up questions, and everybody started building out kind of like an understanding at scope, and taking ownership of that over time. But the real why question can reduce whether, you know, compliance is obvious one, but like even like your application health or basic maintenance data that you need for a survey. I've seen those get up to like 30, 40 questions before. And I'm pretty sure not all those are necessary every time for every person. So just asking critical whys, really good.
And just as like another soft skill as well, as you're talking about here, like it's storytelling.
It truly is.
Yeah, so telling good stories, but at least having some, that it's grounded in something that you're actually trying to accomplish as well.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're talking about communicating change, right, it goes back to communicating a story. I mean, you need to get people behind your story to really get the change moving. So storytelling skills is critical. That might be, as you would say, is like selling to your organization. From a marketer's perspective, it might be storytelling, but at the end of the day, it's really about getting everybody to understand the purpose of what they're doing and why they're doing it, why it's important. And that's going to make more successful projects and implementations and change management by far. Yeah. I was thinking if I could just bring up any examples here on engagement, why that's critical. We've hopped around a little bit, and this is our first live stream, so I can see why that's the case. But looking back at, you know, our customer history, so obviously being a startup, the product we had day one is not the product we have today. One of our earliest customers, just because it's kind of an embarrassing story, I'm not going to use their name, but they had managed their application portfolio in Ardoq since day one. And they've been with us for like 3 years, and they're really confident in their APM. And they're moving on to like all their business objectives and really business focused on their architecture, which was great. But then came GDPR. And so they needed to get some more information around their data and their applications and all that good stuff. And, you know, they're like, it's okay. We're not concerned about there being like black or shadow applications, right? Everything's in the light. We know we have it because we've been running APM for 3 years really, really well. And we advised them to, like, you know, you should let people add new applications to your repository. And they were concerned about duplicates and wrong names and all that kind of stuff, which is a valid, absolute valid concern. But we're like, yeah, it's better to have more data than less. Let's try first. So this is when we rolled out the surveys for the first time. So prior to this, they had just had Ardoq users doing all the APM management, which was good. They had a user base of like 65 people that are active in Ardoq. But once they got the surveys, that jumped up to like 180. And then when they allowed them to add applications, what they found out is they're missing like 20% of their application portfolio, right? So just by involving a new team or new set of people in the organization to contribute to their portfolio, they were finding apps everywhere. And a lot of them had personal data, a lot of them, because a lot of those apps were bought by stereotypical marketing and sales teams that needed to get jobs done, but their jobs involve a lot of personal data often. And you know, that realization was a huge eye-opener for them, which is good to catch early on, obviously, but also a huge eye-opener for us in the value of engagement, right? So this was when we really started doubling down on kind of designing Ardoq for better engagement, whether that is how we deal with roles and user access. And that's why we're going towards, you know, having contributor roles and things like that. That's why we think about, you know, unique UIs for collecting data. That's why we think about, you know, shareable live dynamic presentations or visualizations that are always up to date. All those things that got reinforced by kind of, you know, those little customer stories where you realize the value of engagement. I think it's really critical. Cool. It was good.
I think this was good, wasn't it, Ian?
Yeah, I mean, it was a rant for 20 minutes.
I think it's good. It's a good start.
It's a good start. I mean, I think the topic is the most important thing. We've talked about architecture for so long. And while I think EA is a great space to talk about a lot of things to talk about, just when you think about transformation and change, engagement is it just keeps coming up. Like, I don't know how many times. And to be honest, I'm kind of scared that when we get these big RFIs or RFPs from companies, it's like a footnote. Like, how is your tool going to engage or, you know, build collaboration channels or integrate with our systems, or most of their questions are kind of really off scope. And I think everybody would benefit if they started measuring their own success by engagement. So I think it was a good topic. Commend you on that.
Yeah.
Props, and thanks for making me do this.
Likewise.
High street.
I make you uncomfortable sometimes, but you know that's how you grow. That's how you grow. So thank you guys. We hope you found this interesting, and if you have any questions as well, leave them in the comment section below, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. And have a nice day.